The funeral home was overflowing with black suits and fake sympathy. 200 people filled the pews, perfumed and polished, more concerned with being seen than grieving. I stood by my father's mahogany casket, my hands gripping the wood until my knuckles turned white. The lilies were suffocating their sweetness, cloying, almost mocking. My brother Brian adjusted the microphone at the podium, his Italian suit gleaming under the dim lights. He had that smirk on his face, the one I knew too well, the same look he wore as a boy when he lied about me to our parents, just to see me punished. I felt my stomach twist. He was going to do something. I didn't know what, but I knew it would cut. Before I continue with my eulogy, he said, his voice carrying a false sincerity that could fool strangers. But never me. I think it's important we're all honest about who my father really was and what he really thought. The crowd leaned in, curious. My uncle shifted uncomfortably. My aunt reached for her husband's hand. I tried to catch my mother's eyes, silently pleading for her to intervene, but she sat with her chin raised high, her expression cold and proud, the same one she had perfected across 30 years of marriage. Brian loosened his tie for drama, feeding off the attention. My father died with one great regret, one disappointment that haunted him until his final breath. He paused, savoring the suspense. And then his voice cut like a knife. Gordon Morrison died believing his daughter Thalia was nothing but a failure and a whore. The words struck the room like a physical blow. Gasps echoed through the chapel, followed by nervous, cruel laughter from a few of Brian's business friends. But what gutted me most was my mother. She nodded slowly, deliberately, ensuring everyone saw her agreement. My blood roared in my ears. My body felt like it might collapse, but I refused to fall. Not here, not in front of them. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, using the pain to anchor myself. Brian continued, emboldened. My sister chose her so-called career in a veterinary clinic instead of a real profession. She chose a failed marriage over family loyalty. And when that marriage ended well, we all know what kind of woman leaves her husband, don't we? More laughter rippled, sharp and ugly. I stared at the floor, willing myself not to cry. To cry here would be to give him the victory he craved. The truth hurts, Brian said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. But Dad would want it told. He died ashamed of what his daughter had become. My chest ached. My legs trembled. 200 people were witnessing my execution, and not one of them moved to stop it. I thought of my father's last visit to me just 3 days before his heart gave out. He had brought me a crow with a broken wing, chuckling softly, saying, "This one's a fighter." Reminds me of someone. He meant me. I knew he did. But now, standing in this room, I felt like nothing but the weak disappointment Brian painted me as. And then I heard it. A small voice, steady but clear, cutting through the suffocating silence. "Uncle Brian, you're lying." Every head turned. My 9-year-old niece Zara stood on the pew, her little black dress dotted with daisies, the one I had given her last Christmas. She clutched a wrinkled envelope in her tiny hands, her face streaked with tears, but her jaw set with a defiance far older than her years. Brian's face flushed crimson. "Zara, sit down immediately." But Zara didn't move. She looked at her father with eyes that held no fear. "Grandpa gave me a letter. He said you might say mean things about Aunt Talia at his funeral. He told me that if you did, I should read what he really wrote." The entire room froze. The air conditioning hummed overhead. Someone's phone buzzed and was silenced in panic. All eyes were locked on a child holding a crumpled envelope like it was a sword. Brian sputtered, his voice sharp with warning. "That's enough. Give it to me. Sit down now." But Zara took a step back, raising the envelope higher. "Should I tell them what Grandpa said about you, Daddy? About the money? About Mrs. Henderson? About why he changed his will?" Brian's face drained of color. He froze mid-step, caught in her words. His wife, Wendy, silent until now, snapped her head up, her eyes narrowing. "What did you just say?" she whispered, though her voice carried across the stunned room. And in that suspended moment, I realized something I had never dared to hope before my father had known. He had known what Brian would do, and he had left behind a weapon in the hands of a 9-year-old girl to defend the daughter he had failed to protect in life. I felt tears finally spill over, not from shame this time, but from the shocking, fragile truth my father had chosen to stand up for me after death. Zara's small hands trembled, but her voice did not. She slid the letter from its envelope and unfolded it with the gravity of someone twice her age. The room, restless seconds earlier, hushed into an almost sacred silence. Even the lilies seemed to hold their breath. She cleared her throat. Grandpa said... Her voice wavered, but grew stronger. Grandpa said my Aunt Talia is the bravest person he ever knew. He said she always fought for the broken things no one else cared about. The animals, the people, even him when he was sick. He said she was his lion. Gasps filled the chapel. My knees weakened. My father's handwriting, those words read by the very child who carried his eyes and his spirit. I covered my mouth, unable to stop the sob that escaped. Zara kept reading. He said if anyone ever tries to shame her, they should look in the mirror first. He said family is supposed to protect each other, not destroy each other. Her tiny hands gripped the paper like it was life itself. And he said Brian knows exactly why he changed his will. The room erupted. My mother shot upright, her face pale, her lips pressed thin with fury. This is inappropriate, she snapped, her voice cracking. That letter is nothing but a child's fantasy. But Wendy, Brian's wife, snatched the paper from Zara's hands and scanned it quickly. Her eyes grew wide, her breath ragged. She turned on Brian like a viper. Is it true? She hissed. Did your father really know about Mrs. Henderson? Did he know you stole from him? Whispers surged like wildfire through the pews. Faces I had known all my life turned to look at Brian, not with admiration but suspicion, disgust, betrayal. Brian's composure shattered. He lunged forward, reaching for Wendy, but she pulled back, holding the letter high. Don't you touch me, she cried. You lied to me. To everyone. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. For years, Brian had painted me as the shame of the family. And now, before 200 witnesses, the mask was slipping from his face. Thalia, my mother, barked, desperate to regain control. Say something. Stop this nonsense. But I didn't move. For the first time in my life, I didn't bow to her command. I let the silence speak for me, a silence louder than any scream. Wendy's hands trembled as she read aloud from the bottom of the letter. I, Gordon Morrison, leave my estate, not to my son Brian, but to my daughter Thalia, the only child who never abandoned me. The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. A murmur rippled through the crowd, then a gasp, then an explosion of disbelief. Brian's face contorted with rage. Lies, he shouted, his voice cracking. She forged it, Enough! Wendy's voice sliced through his denial. She slammed the letter against his chest. I believed you when you said your sister ruined this family. But it's you, Brian. It's always been you. He staggered back, eyes darting around as if searching for someone, anyone to take his side. But the room had already chosen. People whispered, shook their heads, shifted away from him as if shame were contagious. Zara slipped off the pew and came to me. She pressed her small hand into mine and whispered, I told you Grandpa wouldn't let him hurt you. Tears streamed freely down my face now. I bent down, kissed her forehead, and whispered back, You were braver than all of us. And in that moment, surrounded by whispers and glares, something broke free inside me, a chain I hadn't even realized I still wore. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift. My father had seen me, defended me, chosen me. Brian's voice rose again, shrill, desperate. This isn't over. She doesn't deserve a dime. I'll fight this in court. But even as he shouted, I knew. The battle he wanted had already been lost. Not in legal papers, not in inheritance, but in truth. He had been exposed, and I was no longer afraid. Brian's shouting echoed off the chapel walls, but no one rushed to silence him. No one defended him. The people who had once laughed at his cruel words now stared with something between disgust and pity. Even his business partners, those slick men in tailored suits, shifted uneasily, realizing they had aligned themselves with a man stripped bare in public. My mother tried to gather herself, rising from her seat, with that familiar air of icy command. We will not tolerate this circus, she declared. But her voice cracked in the middle, thin and brittle. She looked around for support, for nods of agreement, but the crowd no longer bowed to her authority. Her grip on the family, the legacy, the narrative, it was unraveling in real time. Wendy stood tall, still holding the letter. Her face was pale, but her voice steady. I stayed silent when you mocked your sister Brian. I told myself it was just family banter, nothing serious. But this, She shook the paper. This is betrayal. Not just of her, but of me, of your own father. I won't cover for you anymore. The words hit Brian harder than any slap. He staggered, his mouth opening and closing, searching for excuses, but finding none. Zara clung to my skirt, her little shoulders trembling, but her chin lifted like a warrior's. She had lit the match that burned away his lies, and she knew it. I looked around the room. The faces of my relatives blurred, some filled with shame, others with awe. But I didn't need their sympathy. I didn't need their apologies. For once, I wasn't begging to be believed. The truth was standing here, undeniable, written in my father's hand, and spoken by a child's steady voice. Brian lunged again, reaching for Wendy, but two men, distant cousins, stepped in, blocking him. "That's enough," one said firmly. The authority in his tone silenced the last of Brian's resistance. He slumped, his body deflating as though all the arrogance had drained out of him. I found my own voice then. For years it had been buried under insults, smirks, and silence. But now it rose steady and strong. "You tried to bury me in shame, Brian. You tried to turn Dad's funeral into my execution. But the only thing buried today is your mask." Gasps rippled again. I hadn't planned the words, they poured out of me raw and unfiltered. My mother's eyes burned into mine, full of rage and denial, but I didn't look away. For the first time, I didn't flinch. Wendy turned, her eyes softening as she looked at me. "I'm sorry, Talia," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the stunned room. "For believing him, for not seeing you sooner." I swallowed hard, fighting back a new wave of tears. "The truth has a way of coming out," I whispered back. Zara tugged my sleeve, her small voice steady. "Mama said Grandpa always wanted the truth." The weight of her words, the innocence of them, broke something open in me. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight, as the crowd finally stirred, whispers, rising chairs, shifting people, moving with the restless energy of a story they would tell for years. Brian stood alone now, abandoned even by the mother who had once shielded him. She looked at him with thinly veiled disgust, as though his exposure had tainted her image. For once he had no allies, only shadows. As the mourners began to file out, some stopped to squeeze my hand, to murmur apologies, to tell me I had been vindicated. But I didn't need their validation. The only voice I needed had already been written in ink by my father and spoken aloud by Zara. The service ended not with solemn hymns, but with the undeniable truth ringing in every heart: the shame wasn't mine. It had never been mine. And though grief still sat heavy in my chest for the first time in decades, I walked out of a room with my head high, unburdened. My father was gone, but in his final act, he had given me back my dignity. The sun outside was blinding as we stepped from the dark chapel into the afternoon light. For a moment I had to squint, shielding my eyes, but then I let it wash over me. It felt symbolic, almost holy, like I had been carried out of a dungeon and into something resembling freedom. Zara held my hand tightly, her tiny fingers warm against my trembling palm. Wendy walked just behind us, her face pale but resolute. She wasn't standing beside Brian anymore. She wasn't shielding him. She was done. Behind us, Brian erupted once more, shouting about lawyers, about forged letters, about betrayal. But his words sounded thin, now powerless. People passed him without stopping, without offering sympathy. Some shook their heads, others refused to look at him at all. For the first time in his life, he was invisible. My mother stormed out not long after, her heels clicking furiously against the pavement. She didn't say a word to me. Her silence had always been her weapon, but today it felt more like surrender. She climbed into the black car waiting for her and slammed the door. The tires screeched as she was driven away. I stood there holding Zara close, breathing in the cool air. For years I had been the scapegoat of this family, the disappointment, the burden, the failure. They fed on my silence, on my willingness to absorb every cruel word. And yet here I was, still standing, while the lies they had built their pride upon crumbled to dust around them. That night, after the chaos, I sat at my kitchen table with the letter unfolded before me. My father's handwriting, familiar, looping, imperfect, stared back at me. I traced the words with trembling fingers. My lion. He had called me his lion. Tears blurred the ink, but they weren't the tears of shame I had known for so long. They were tears of release, of recognition. He had seen me. Maybe not always in life, but enough to leave behind this truth for the world to hear. Zara sat across from me, sipping cocoa from a chipped mug. Her eyes were heavy with sleep, but she refused to go to bed until I smiled. "You're not what Uncle Brian said," she whispered firmly like a vow. "You're strong. Grandpa said so. I say so." I reached across the table, cupping her cheek in my hand. "You're stronger than all of us," I told her. And I meant it. Because it had taken more courage than I'd ever known to stand in that chapel with every eye watching and speak the truth no adult dared to. The days that followed were messy. Lawyers called. The will was confirmed, legitimate, notarized, ironclad. Brian raged, but it didn't matter. The estate was mine. The inheritance was mine. But strangely, that wasn't what brought me peace. What mattered was that people finally saw. They saw Brian for what he was. They saw me not as the failure he painted, but as someone who had survived his cruelty. And though my mother never called, though she clung to her bitterness and denial, I no longer needed her acceptance. Wendy filed for separation weeks later. She sent me a quiet message. "Thank you for showing me the truth. I wish I had believed you sooner." I didn't gloat. I didn't reply with bitterness. I just wished her peace, because she too had been deceived by him. And Brian, he fell. Faster than I expected. His colleagues abandoned him. His reputation collapsed. The lies he had spun for decades unraveled thread by thread until there was nothing left but a man stripped of power, exposed for the fraud he had always been. Sometimes late at night I think about the funeral, the gasps, the silence, the way my niece's voice cut through the air sharper than any blade. And I realized that was the moment my life split in two. Before, when I was the scapegoat, and after, when I reclaimed my truth. My father is gone, but in his last gift he gave me back my voice. He gave me back myself. And through Zara, his courage lived on. To anyone listening to my story, I want you to know this. Cruelty may wound you. Betrayal may bury you. But the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. And when it does, it shines brighter than all the lies in the world. So if you've ever been mocked, silenced, or cast aside, hold on. Your roar is still inside you. One day the world will hear it. Thank you for staying with me through this painful but healing journey. If my story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment with your own story. I want to hear your voice too, because your truth matters.